So, I want to share with you my experience with dysautonomia, specifically with POTS. And the reason is because, for one, there's just not a lot of information on the internet about it. You can find some things, but in general, it's still not super studied or known about. And the other reason I want to share is because through my entire health journey, one of the most important things for me in terms of getting new insight has been hearing other people's stories. So, like running across random blogs or YouTube videos or things like that where people shared their experience. And often that was the catalyst that led me to so many like aha moments. So, I'm sharing my experience personally, knowing that everyone's experience with dysautonomia is completely different. There's a huge spectrum. So where I'm at is certainly not to say where someone else is at, but hopefully it's helpful. So my experience has been that my journey began with a bacterial infection in my gut, and I'll share more about that at another time. But basically, over the past about year and a half, I've had this cluster of symptoms that hasn't gone away. So since treating that infection and going through different like treatment protocols, so many things in my body have healed, and we've seen doctors and specialists, and my vitamin levels are perfect in my blood now, and my gastroparesis has healed for the most part. My menstruation returned, my nutrient absorption is back, my motility is normal, crazy dysfunctions in the microbiome have healed. So like so many things have healed, and we can see all of that, and it's so good. But there's been this cluster of symptoms that has still been really overwhelming, and they've been hard because they're not tangible things. So from the outside, everything looks pretty normal now, and tests show a lot of health, but I've known that something is still off, and we've just assumed that this is just part of the journey, because when your microbiome gets totally wiped out, you have a lot of complications on the road towards healing. So that's sort of been what we assumed. But some of the symptoms that I was still experiencing were constantly feeling like I'm going to faint. That's like an overarching one and the most debilitating. And just this overall sense of like dizziness and this weight sort of in my head. And then another one is chronic fatigue, needing to sleep like 10 hours a night and waking up like I didn't sleep at all, feeling like I have a hangover every morning. So like waking up, my muscles are super sore. It takes me hours to like get out the door or just like get ready. Mornings are just so hard, and feeling like super unsteady, and sometimes having to hold on to walls, or Stephen will have to help me get out of bed in the morning. So just really like debilitating things in that sense of the word. I know I'm super fortunate that those symptoms don't actually debilitate me for the whole day, but they've been super frustrating, and they are with me to some degree 24/7. So what happened was me and my husband went to Hawaii earlier this year, and while we were there, all of those symptoms left. So I was sleeping like 8 hours, waking up feeling like I had so much energy, and we would go out for the day and we would do so much stuff. I was like totally fine, felt amazing the whole time. No dizziness, all those symptoms left. Which for sure there is a mind-body connection when it comes to vacationing, and we are totally aware of that. But the interesting thing is that these also left when I went to San Diego a while back. And then another time we went on vacation to a cabin in Payson, which is in Arizona, my hometown, and the symptoms were way worse. So it doesn't quite align with an emotional gut-brain axis situation. And the other things were that I was having experiences. So right when we returned, all of the symptoms rushed back. like to an escalated level. So I returned, and within 24 hours, my fingers and my toes were completely cold and numb in the morning. And I stood up, and there were spots everywhere. Stephen had helped me out of bed that morning, and then many mornings after that. Um, I was like so dizzy and disoriented that it was really challenging to like just do normal things like make food and things like that. So once we sort of decided that this was definitely a physical response, Steven started researching again, put his head in the computer for about 2 hours, and he came across something called POTS, which I'd heard about once, but wasn't at all familiar with it. But as we learned more about it, we were like, oh my gosh, all these weird symptoms that I thought were just like random it was like this list. And when you have this list of symptoms and then there's like a name at the top, it's like, oh my goodness, this is some degree of normal within this spectrum of dysautonomia. So we got into a specialist right away in Arizona who was absolutely fantastic, and she looked at my symptoms and did some testing on my body and was very confident that I had POTS. And aside from the symptoms, the main indicators that you have POTS on like a physical monitoring level is that within standing, your beats per minute of your heart increase by over 30 beats per minute, or that you get over 120 beats per minute just by standing within the first 10 minutes of standing. So that's sort of like how you test that. And so, for example, for me this morning, I woke up and my heart rate was 57 BPM when I was laying there, and then got myself out of bed, stood up, looked at my heart rate, and I was at 122. So that's very not normal. And then, of course, within like standing for a while, it went down to like 98, but that was still extremely escalated. And then it took a while for me to get back down to a normal rate. So if you're curious, that's how you would measure it for yourself if any of these symptoms resonate with you. So what is POTS? And it's POTS, not POTT apostrophe S. That's something completely different. But POTS is basically a dysfunction of your autonomic nervous system. So your autonomic nervous system is responsible for all of the things that you don't have to think about, like your blood pressure, your digestion, your regulating your body temperature, regulating your heartbeat, telling your blood to pump throughout your body, all of those things. So when the nervous system gets a little bit tipped, it doesn't properly regulate those things anymore. One of the main things with POTS is that it doesn't tell your heart how to properly pump enough blood. So your blood pools in the lower half of your body, which makes your heart have to beat overtime to try to oxygenate and get to all your organs. And so it causes a lot of lightheadedness because there's not enough blood up there, really cold appendages, and it puts a lot of stress on your organs because everything is having to work like exponentially more because they're not getting the proper blood flow and the proper oxygenation that they should be. So overall, your entire body just has a lower tolerance level. So when you get sick, you get sicker longer, you get sicker easier. Digestion is harder and has to be a little more micromanaged because that's something that the nervous system should take care of by itself, which for the most part it does, but there are still some complications. You're like just doing normal activity fatigues you easier because your heart rate is just trying to keep up. And also normal pain in the body that would be experienced to a low degree with POTS, it's extremely higher. So there's not as much margin just in general, emotionally, physically, all the things. Like your margin is just smaller because you're constantly running an internal marathon. So that's sort of what POTS is. Um, it's not a degenerative disease, and it just needs to be monitored and taken account for and taken care of throughout your life, because it in of itself won't degenerate your body, but putting so much stress on your organs for so long, that can obviously cause complications. So personally, the symptoms that I personally experience, and this is on a spectrum, so I know for sure that I'm super fortunate to only experience this degree of symptoms, and I know not everybody is. But my symptoms are constant feeling of faintishness, like it's called pre-fainting, so you chronically feel like you're going to pass out, and when that gets too escalated, then anxiety sets in, obviously, which leads to like a lot of dizziness. Fatigue is huge. Mornings are like a train wreck. For me, like every morning just is like a crazy hangover. I've never had a hangover actually, but I assume that that's what it would feel like. Nausea comes and goes more frequently, a lot in the morning and a lot through the night. So it's really common to have like acid reflux because of the complications in your body. So I'm constantly like swiping peppermint oil on my tongue throughout the night. Really cold fingers and toes all the time, even if my body is warm. Like, you don't want me to touch you unless you're hot, and then it's great. A lot of brain fog, which makes things super frustrating. That was something I experienced in Hawaii when I was there. I had no brain fog, and I didn't even really realize what that was like. And I had so many ideas for my clients and life and things like that. And then when we got home, I was like literally in tears on the bed with Steven because I was just like, I can't even think straight. I don't even want to do anything. So brain fog is really, really big for me. It's really hard to sit over 30 minutes, which is super normal for anybody with POTS, because your blood pools in the bottom half of your body. So if you're sitting, it's just sort of sitting there pooling if you're not like contracting your calf muscles. So then you get more and more dizzy and lightheaded. And that it affects me in more ways than one, but I think the biggest one has been like socially. And I haven't had this information to like put it all together. But it's like overwhelming for me sometimes to just have a coffee date with friends or something. And I love that. That's like my favorite thing in the world, is to connect with people. And so it's been so bothersome that I feel like by the end of hanging out with someone, I'm lightheaded. So that's something though that now that we know that it has to do with sitting, that will be helpful. Not being able to drive is a huge one, and that's something probably not a lot of people know about me. But I haven't driven for like over a year, and I've sort of chalked it up to like, am I just not brave enough? Am I, is this like emotional? Am I having like anxiety attacks? Like, what's going on? I just feel dizzy all the time, so I feel like it's dangerous to drive. But it turns out it is. You don't want me on the road with you. So not being able to drive, which luckily I have a husband who works remotely, so I'm very taken care of in that way. And then also getting sick more often and staying sick longer. It just takes longer to recover from things. And another symptom of POTS is that you generally have a flu-y feeling. So there's oftentimes where I think I'm sick, but I'm probably actually not. I'm just experiencing these like flu-like symptoms in my body, which is super common. And if you have POTS, you've probably experienced that too. And then just a general inability to like fully participate in life. I think that's what's grieved me most the last year and a half is so much has healed in my body, and I've been able to work with clients and go back to school and all of these things, and I'm so, so grateful for it. But there's been this like invisible thing that has kept me from fully participating in the things I want to do and socially. And so I think that's been like just the hardest part for me because it constantly feels like I'm going to pass out and like there's a brick in my head. And that's really hard to explain to people because it's not something that's typically experienced. And when you don't have a name for it or a reason for it, it's just like very confusing. So that's been huge. So having a name um, definitely feels helpful because it gives us a track and something to walk along. So how does POTS happen? How did it onset? This is different for everyone, but in general, you are more susceptible to POTS or to dysautonomia in general, which is like the umbrella term for a bunch of different nervous system disorders. If you're a woman and if you're like in the ages between like 17 to like 35, I think those are the most common ages, you're more susceptible. And it's commonly, they say, like turned on, so it's triggered if you have an infection, a bacterial infection, which I have experienced, so that could have been my trigger. Or it can be turned on just by having a lot of like stress in the body, and not necessarily like mental stress or lifestyle stress, but actual like physical stress. So going through treatments or things like that would obviously trigger nervous system issues, because after a while your nervous system just is like, oh my goodness, I'm so tired, and so something then gets a little bit tipped, and so that's how this sort of unravels. So how to support it? We talked with the specialist and she gave us some really specific things for me with POTS, so I'm going to share those. But again, everyone's diagnosis is different in what they need. But a lot of these things, because I've had this for over a year and just haven't had like the name for it, I've learned already that like that's weird, but that makes my body thrive. So that's what I've done. And then now we understand like why those things matter. So specifically, what they are for me, the ways that my body has to be supported so that there's not as much stress going on my organs, and my body's able to regulate a little bit better and get more oxygen to my brain and to my organs. The first one is hydration. So that's key for anyone with POTS, because your blood is pooling in the lower half of your body. So by adding more hydration, more water, it increases your blood volume. So that helps with all the feelings of faintishness. And it also helps to lower your blood pressure if that spikes. But the complicated thing with hydration, and a lot of people, I'm one of them, is that like your nervous system doesn't properly regulate your ability to hold on to hydration. So like overactive bladder or sweating profusely or things like that, that's not something that's regulated by the nervous system if you have POTS. For some people, not for everybody. But for me, that's been an issue for a while. I'm not able to like hold on to hydration. I'm just constantly dehydrated. And so it's a huge problem then when your blood is pooling as well. So staying hydrated as best you can. Salt is huge because that allows your body to hold on to the fluids better. So this is different, I think, probably for people, especially if you had like any sort of like kidney or like other heart complication. I'm not prescribing this, but what was important for me was about a teaspoon of salt a day and putting that in my water. But again, like that is different for everyone. Compression socks are really important because they squeeze your calves so that it helps push the blood upwards. But like medical grade compression socks, ones that you would order specifically from your doctor that have the correct amount of pressure and are fit for your body specifically. And then monitoring your heart rate constantly. So having like some sort of an Apple Watch or a Fitbit that allows you to track that sort of helps you know, like, am I actually in danger, or is this just something that, like I'm faintish and I'm okay. I'm just gonna live with this rather than no, I need to like actually stop and take care of this. Humidity is super important for me specifically, and that was the reason why Hawaii and San Diego were very different for my body, because Arizona is one of the driest places. So for me specifically, the specialist was very clear that humidity is key for my body to be able to hold on to hydration externally and for my organs to be able to work properly. Elevation makes it worse. So the higher I am, the worse I'm going to feel. And then exercise is super important, which feels like the last thing sometimes that you want to do, but it's so, so important. And that's something I've already known. Like, I feel like that train wreck until I do my exercise for about an hour. And then I feel like I can go, I can conquer things. So that's like super important to get your blood flowing, and then frequently walking throughout the day so that your calves are pumping blood up to your brain and you're not sitting longer than 30 minutes, or that can mess with you. And then the last thing, kind of just general, is just doing as many things that you can to turn down the alarm systems. So there are constantly a lot of alarms going off in your body when you are experiencing dysautonomia. And the more of those that you can control, the better. So you definitely can't control most of them, but there are things like your environment, your stimulation, like how high the music is. For me, like scents really impact me, and even textiles, like my clothes have to be like a certain weight and feel and texture, and just leaving yourself enough margin in life, like big stressors or time crunches, or even like for me being in environments that are really crowded and there's a lot of noise and a lot of people, that turns on a few too many alarms, and there's already too many alarms, so that can really like tip me. So for me, one thing that's been really important has been meditation and visualizations. So every morning I spend about 20 minutes just sitting with my eyes closed with like nature music on, and that has been what's allowed me to like, okay, I feel like I can do this and I can keep going. And then sometimes when I'm in a really big flare, I'll do it again in the afternoon, and that will help me again. And so I always knew that that was part of what had to happen in my day. And then when we got this diagnosis and I started monitoring my heart, I realized that like this morning, for instance, I woke up with and my heart rate immediately spiked past 120, and then I sat down and did my visualizations, and for every 10 minutes, my heart rate decreased by 10 beats per minute. So I was able to get to a place where it was like, okay, we're safe, and now we can move on. So that's been super helpful for me, and will continue to be, and I think is important probably for anyone struggling with dysautonomia. So that's it. That's sort of my overview of what it is and how it affects me personally, and some of the things that are helpful and have been helpful and hopefully will be helpful as we experiment with more and more changes for me. But mostly I also want to say that like I feel really grateful for this diagnosis and even for this experience, which seems ironic, but we have experienced, me and Steven, we've experienced so many symptoms come and go in my body, and I imagine it, I had this vision of healing being like a tree, and if you've gone through chronic illness, you can probably relate. It's like the root system gets a little bit severed and all the branches die. And then one by one, we sit on a branch and we experience this symptom. We figure out what it is after tests or whatever research, and then slowly we help it come back to life. And then it has leaves, and we move on to the next branch. And then we're sitting in this new symptom, and here it is. And sometimes they take weeks, and sometimes they take years to heal. And then we move on. So it feels like we're chronically sick or in dysfunction. But the reality is we can look back at the tree and see so many branches have come back to life. So I feel like this is just another branch with my nervous system, and I have a lot of hope that we're going to be able to support it. It's just my body raising its hand in another way. So the fact that we have a little bit more of a guiding light is actually really helpful, and I feel really grateful that all of these symptoms and all the tree branches that have already come back to life and now experiencing dysautonomia and POTS, those are all things that as I work with clients, I have such better understanding than I would have ever had if I had just studied it or from the things that I learned about in school, because I can say like, yes, me too. I know exactly what it's like to have POTS or gastroparesis or nutrient malabsorption or microbiome imbalances or debilitating gas pains or nerve pain or extreme fatigue, all these things. I've been there and we've walked that road. And so, yeah, I just feel thankful that we are aware, and I'm thankful for doctors and for knowledge. So I hope that this helps you understand a little bit more about POTS or my journey, if that's what you're interested in, or if you're interested for your own journey, then I hope that it brings a little bit of comfort or light to maybe what you're experiencing. And again, everyone's experience is different, so this is just mine. I'm not a certified doctor. I'm a certified integrative nutrition coach, so definitely bring these concerns to your doctor if you think you might be experiencing them, and feel free to comment or leave any questions that you have for me, or if you want to get in contact with a specialist in the Arizona, Phoenix area, I would highly recommend the one that I worked with. So that's it, and I hope you have a really great day, and I will see you in the next video.